Welcome to Level with Emily. Today's episode features composer Mason Lieberman. Mason works for Tencent Games. I believe Tencent is the largest video game company in the world. So you can imagine that Mason gets to work on all kinds of different projects, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. Mason also has worked on a lot of anime projects, so he'll talk about that as well. Of course, this being the YouTube version of the conversation, you won't hear samples of Mason's music, but you can hear that mixed into the episode, as always, on the audio version of the podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And we're always looking for you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Please do that. Or if you're in the mood, become a patron to Level with Emily and support what we do there. In any event, Mason and I met in early April at VGMCon here in Minneapolis. And we did a panel together, talked a little bit about his career. So this is a little bit of a repeat of sorts of that conversation, although we go dig a little bit deeper into some things here in this version of our conversation. So without further ado, I'll allow Mason to take it from here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mason Lieberman. I am the senior composer and audio supervisor at Tencent, managing the Lightspeed and Quantum audio pipeline. In no particular order, that means that I spend an awful lot of time creating music, working with sound designers or voice actors, and just generally solving problems and creating stuff for games like PUBG Mobile, Apex Legends Mobile, Teamfight Tactics in China, Game for Peace in China, and just a host of others. And since a lot of these are games as a service titles, we do a lot of crossovers with other brands. So that means that I've worked with IP like Spider-Man, like Mobile Suit Gundam, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Ultraman, Godzilla vs. Kong, and a jillion others in the process of doing this. Tesla, Lamborghini, you name it.
Yeah, because, I mean, Tencent is such a huge company, and, you know, they kind of have their fingers in a lot of gaming pies, too. So, you know, it sounds like that would just be nice to be able to work in so many different products, you know? I mean, I just can't imagine that you get bored with it just seems like you're constantly bouncing around.
I'm incredibly hyperactive, and so this is like a dream job in that way. It's very different every single day. I get a lot of questions from students like, oh, what's like a normal day like? And I usually just kind of like give like that 1,000-year stare and just go, what is normal? Yeah. I don't know. It changes every single week. You know, some days are very, communication heavy, and I'm dealing with like outside vendors, making sure that they understand what we need and making sure that we get the right kind of music. And some days I'm like, hard grinding for like an orchestral recording session in like LA or Prague or wherever it is given week. Some days it's just all in the box. It's all computer. It's all production. Some days I'm doing hard rock vocals. Some days it's like EDM. Sometimes it's pure classical orchestra, jazz, you name it, like every genre, every style, all over the place, all of the time.
And do you ever wish you could just do one? Or you kind of said it's your personality.
Yeah, I've never been very good at focusing on one thing at a time. When I was starting up my career, I was like, I'm going to be a composer and a recording artist and a producer, and I'm going to ADR music direct and blah, blah, blah. And then I did, because I really could not make one thing work. I just kind of had to try and do as many as possible. And for me, that's what built a full career. I didn't actually mention, outside of Tencent, I have a pretty long history working in the anime industry and in games in general. Working as a composer, a recording artist, a music producer, and ADR music director, etc., for just a ton of shows and franchises, including, in no particular order, having worked on League of Legends, Super Smash Bros., Wii U 3DS, Star Wars Visions, Beyblade, Ruby, Rising of the Shield Hero, Sarazanmai, Robihachi, How Heavy Are the Dumbbells You Lift, Zombieland Saga, How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, Back Arrow, Shadow's House, Pokemon the Animated Series, Star Wars Visions. It goes on and on forever.
Yeah.
I do do a lot of random stuff in a lot of very random roles.
Yeah, and now you and I had the pleasure of doing a panel together. Excuse me.
Yeah, that was so much fun. Thank you so much, Emily.
It was great at VGMCon. It was here in Minneapolis the first weekend in April, and it was awesome to have you here and to get to know you and do the panel with you. And I've completely lost my train of thought, which is fantastic.
It was great to get to meet you too.
Thank you. Now, in that panel, you mentioned that you had gotten to travel to Japan a lot because you had this person come stay with your family, and we had that. We had someone come from Sweden, and he's still a part of our family too. Like, I have a Swedish brother, so this is what happened with your family. So tell me about that.
So I was a pretty young kid. I was probably about 8 years old. I think like first or second grade, something around then. And my hometown, I grew up in Tyler, Texas, East Texas, middle of nowhere, basically. Maybe like 2 hours from Dallas or something. We had a Sister Cities program with this place outside of Tokyo in Japan. And this woman basically was an educator. She was a teacher who was sent to our community to, promote cultural diversity, teach people about Japanese culture, etc. for a year. Her name was Junko, and she lived with me and my family for a little over a year during that period of time. And it was wonderful. It was very educational. There are a lot of very cute pictures of me and my sister, who is like a year and 51 weeks older than me, for reference, being like little kids wearing like kimonos and doing tea ceremonies with her and like going to Disneyland and all this stuff. And of course, being 8, I got very attached to her. She was basically like an older sister to me. Junko came from a traditional Shinto family and had an arranged marriage. So when I was 8 years old, they literally sent over the man who was going to marry her while she was with us to say, hey, this is Hiro Hanzawa. He's going to be your husband. And so we met him at basically the same time that she did. And of course, we went to the wedding, and my dad was going to give a speech as basically her foster dad from America, from her time there, to speak about her experiences overseas. And we went over, and we were like basically with the family the entire time. And we did I guess you would call it like a formal portrait or whatever of the extended families kind of coming together as like one group, which remains one of the funniest photos that we have, because I want you to basically just picture like 30 or 40 like native Japanese people, all in like formal wear, all looking fantastic, very clean, facing straight on the camera, very serious faces. And then like 5 dumb Americans who are all just like grinning and cheesing it for the camera because we didn't know that wasn't what you were supposed to do. And so it's a very, very it's a very funny picture. But ever since that wedding, basically, we've considered Junko like an adoptive sister. My parents have considered her like a daughter. Mm-hmm. And I've considered her family like mine. I think of myself as having 3 Japanese nieces, basically. And that was actually one of the big inspirations for me to start studying Japanese back in college, was that I had this family over there, and Junko could speak pretty solid English. She'd lived here for a year, but her kids were young. It was much harder for them, and I wanted to be able to still try to connect with them on some way. So I started learning Japanese.
And that relationship led you to have a little bit of a unique experience in terms of Japanese media too, right? Like me growing up in central Iowa, I didn't know people who watched anime or read any, comics either, So, I didn't have that connection, but you had a really special relationship there to understand some of that and consume that.
Yeah. From basically the age of 8 onward, obviously, like every other kid in America at that time, I was obsessed with Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, like all of these shows that at that age I wouldn't have even realized were anime. Like, they were just cartoons to me.
Sure.
Somewhere in America, thousands of anime fans are like losing their shit that I just said that. But like Junko would send me like Japanese version like manga for me to read, even though I didn't speak the language. So it's like I have one of the original copies of like the first printing of Dragon Ball in the original Japanese, the Kid Goku, like the original arc type stuff. And like one of my first Pokemon games was Pokemon Crystal, which I got from Japan in Japanese before it had come out in America. So, like, I would go to school, the other kids would be like, guys, there's this other Pokemon game that's coming. It's called Crystal. It's going to be amazing. And they'd be like, we don't believe you. And I'm like, what's this? And they'd, like, think that I somehow made it or something, because kids are wild. But, like, yeah, you know, I was playing games and listening to music and watching anime from a really young age. And, you know, I owe a lot of that to Junko. She introduced me to a lot of that stuff, and I think that that's part of maybe what ultimately led me down the career path that I am now, because so much of the sound of this stuff was something that I grew up accustomed to. And a lot of times when in any culture, like any time that you're asked to write music authentically from a given cultural perspective or background, the hardest thing to do is to get your ear into it, is to hear it the way that someone who's from that culture, from that community, would hear it originally. Like, that's the thing that you can't really fake, for lack of a better word. Like, you are always influenced by the musical tropes of your own culture. You're always influenced by the sounds that you heard growing up and what certain things feel like to you based on the music that you listen to. And because I had experience with this music from a young age, it helped me to kind of be able to kind of analyze it in a way and understand it and see what it was intended to be and how it was intended to feel and what it meant. And, you know, obviously it's not the same as being a native Japanese speaker, not the same as being a native person from that community who grew up with that music. But to a certain degree, I did grow up with the music. It was something that surrounded me my entire childhood, which I think helped a lot, especially with like the first few jobs when, you know, you're just hard grinding really fast and you don't have time to second guess yourself and you just have to hope that it's good. And having that in my back pocket, like having that experience and that information, made it so that sometimes it was still good, you know, all things considered. Kept me from getting fired, we'll say.
You know, I'm trying to decide where I want to go next here because there are a lot of things that brings up for me. I do want to know a little bit more about, you know, your role with your title, because, you know, and you touched on this a little bit where, you know, every day is different. Some days are really like communication heavy and correspondence heavy. And I mean, to what degree do you feel like sometimes you really are just piecing together a puzzle and getting people to come together to make the thing that needs to be made?
I would say that is every single day. So, you know, for what it's worth, with any AAA company, and I don't think Tencent is any different here, there are so many things going on at any given time that it would be impossible for any one person to just be privy to all of it, to be on the ball for every single thing.
Yeah.
So I'm really lucky that we have a fantastic team of a ton of creators involved to help make the process smoother and easier. And it's very important that when you're working on stuff like this, when you're working with this many people, that you need to be as open and communicative as possible, because you're probably not operating with perfect information. We almost never are. You know, the reality is there's almost always something that ties in with the project you're working on that you're just not familiar with because you're not on that part of the project. And if someone gives you feedback on something that doesn't make sense, you need to communicate that and try and ask for clarity and understand where they're coming from and operate with the assumption that everything is being said in good faith. So as far as kind of the nature of the work, I'm not sure if I'm still on grasp with the question you had, but I'm trying anyway.
You're doing great.
Thank you. Sorry. I honestly lost my train of thought too. Clearly one of those days for both of us.
Yeah. It's the weather changing.
Oh my gosh, it is so hot out here. Back to what I was saying.
Yeah.
So it's my job to try and understand the history of what we've done, the sound of it, the feel of it, what the fans expect, and to make sure that our audio team, all of our other composers, any of the audio vendors we're working with, and so on, are able to reach that standard, are able to provide those experiences that the fans want. And hopefully, in the process, we uncover new things that they didn't know that they wanted. It's not just about trying to do the exact same thing that we've done 3,000 times. It's also about finding those new vantage points and new perspectives that could make a player go, oh, I'm really happy that I opened the game today. This is so cool. And we're always looking for that kind of thing. We always want to find something interesting. And for me, as a composer, when you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Every time I'm looking for a new way to do something cool, I think musically. And I think, oh, it would be so cool if we got this kind of artist, or we got someone from this background, or we got someone who specializes in this music. And what if, instead of doing this thing that everyone usually does with it, and that's super obvious, what if we just tried it like this? And, let's see what happens. We can explore, benefit of being a large company. We can afford to fail and try again periodically. Tencent tends to be very flexible at giving us the opportunity to try out an approach and then make sure that we're scheduling in such a way where we have time to try again if the initial idea doesn't turn out to be solid.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And that brings up another point too. It's just how you have got to be on top of all these trends musically that are happening. And how do you do that? And, it's clear that you're very upfront about how, you don't rely on only you to do this. You ask for help and stuff, but clearly you do stay on top of trends somehow. So what are your ways? Like, do you just put on J-pop top 40, or how are you? How do you do that?
I have a small collection of Zoomers who just send me stuff and tell me that I'm an old man periodically. Keeps me young. No, but in all seriousness, music is something, it is a communal experience. It's something that's meant to be shared. And I really go out of my way to get friends to show me their stuff, show me what they're working on. I'm constantly trying to find new music. I absolutely love just deep diving into Spotify or whatever and just riding the algorithm off into the distance and seeing where I end up. And, it gets me into a lot of really weird stuff. And my For You, daily feed on Spotify is complete and utter gibberish.
Oh, yeah.
But it ends up giving me a lot of interesting stuff. And, that's sometimes where I find a lot of my J-pop references, a lot of my C-pop references, a lot of my K-pop, my East Asian pop in general, I guess you might say. It's often where I'll find a lot of my soundtracks. I'm trying to listen to stuff all the time. I think that there's kind of a classic idiom that a chef who doesn't eat isn't a chef. A writer who doesn't read isn't really a writer. A musician who doesn't listen to music probably isn't a great musician. And I don't know if I would ever call myself a great musician, but I definitely try to listen to a lot of great music.
Yeah.
And, I try to surround myself with talented artists who are constantly inspiring me, who are doing amazing stuff all the time. And, that helps me wake up every morning, be like, oh my God, I get to do this for a living. Holy shit.
So is there a special style that grabs you immediately, that you get most excited to do? Because I think, when you listen to a good composer's music, such as yourself, you can hear the care and thought that goes into all their music. But I do think that, there must be one where you're like, oh, yes, I get to do more J-pop today. Or, oh, my God, I get to do a chamber piece for this relaxing section in this game. Or, what stirs your, stuff?
So kind of two answers. One of them is the thing that I probably get thought of the most for, which is J-rock. I love doing J-rock. At the moment, I probably end up doing one or two songs in J-rock style, per week at this point. It comes up all the time. And I have just albums and albums worth of this stuff at this point.
Nice.
That are in a jillion different projects. That's always a ton of fun. And for me, like, I'm very excessive in my music production. Like, I like things loud. I like them big. I use probably way too much reverb. I'm sure that every single mix engineer in the audience is cringing when they listen to my mixes. But I'm a big fan of, like, oh man, it would be so cool if there's like 4 guitar parts. Oh, and a full string orchestra. Oh my god, what if there's synthesizers in here too? Oh man, let's throw a choir in there. Why not? Oh yeah, the piano's gonna have a crazy line that goes woo over here. And like, before I know it, it's like 200 tracks of like 70 or 80 different musical parts going simultaneously and just like massive walls of sound. I love doing that.
Yeah.
And then on a very different perspective side of things, I actually really love doing like jazz and jazz fusion. I love funk fusion in particular.
Nice.
It is so much fun to me in any genre, not just here, but this is one of those places where I feel like I really feel the benefit of it. I don't really write for instruments, I write for players. And I try to think of like, oh, I don't want a trumpet solo, I want John Robert Motz on trumpet. And I don't want a violin solo, I want Jeff Ball, or I might want like Molly Rogers, etc. You know, like I think in those terms, in specific players, specific sounds. And for me, when you're doing funk, it's just like a group of people in a room just jamming along, feeling each other, and they're all doing that to each other, and it's so much fun. I love to just like sit on a groove and just like slowly expand and feel out every single textural detail of like a guitarist comping out or a bassist grooving along and having fun. You know, it reminds me of college to a fair degree. I'm a huge fan of jam sessions. So like that kind of stuff is just a huge blast. My soundtrack for the upcoming indie title, Renane, has a lot of that stuff, actually. And, you know, I wish that I had more games in that vibe, because it's such a fun world to enter.
Do you find that when you're doing, like, jazz, more jazz-oriented tracks, that you're kind of stepping out of the way more in terms of composing? Because, you know, jazz musicians are often reading from lead sheets and all this stuff. I mean, speak about that.
So I am a very big believer in writing what I sometimes loosely call 80% of a part. I think that, and this isn't just for jazz, I do this in all genres. I do this with my rock guitarists. I do this with my piano soloists and everything.
Sure.
The way that I often will produce things is I play a lot of instruments and I will play the part myself and send people an audio reference of me doing everything. And I would say that that reference is like 80% of the way to what I want. Like, it sounds really solid. Most of the detail work is there. A lot of the actual lines are exactly the way I intended. All the hits are there, etc. Mm-hmm. But I will get to that final 20% and say, hey, I want your take on this. I want the thing that you would do that only you can do that brings this to the next level. And that's usually what you then hear on the final versions of my tracks. Mm-hmm. I love working with insanely talented musicians who just have creative ideas, who have like an angle and a perspective on things. I would rather meet a player who I can only hire once a year than 300 times a year, if that once a year is like the most memorable thing that I do that year. Like, I want someone who's going to do something that no one else is willing to do.
Yeah.
You know, I'm always looking for like the crazy ones, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun.
You mentioned too just the wall of sound that you love to, and you know, especially, you know, if you go to Mason's website, masonlieberman.com, and you listen to the real, you know, that a lot of your favorites are those epic orchestral. And it's so funny because a track will start and they'll be like, oh, this is like orchestra, and then you'll hear like the guitars will come in, like, you know, and they're like wailing, and then like synth will come in, and then there'll be like taiko drums, and it really is, it's like a little bit of everything. But yet
a little bit of everything all of the time.
Yeah, but I mean, but that's also the style, right? I mean, I think that's very indicative of, you know, that style.
Yeah, I would say coming from anime, a aesthetic where oftentimes we do literally more or less throw everything in the kitchen sink. Like, people expect that full orchestra and that full choir and those rock guitars and those synthesizers and everything in between, you know, some kind of unique, crazy soloist in a style you've never heard of.
Yeah.
And it's all very quirky, and it's very energetic, and it's very wild, and it's very melodic. Melodic is a big part of this, too. That is such a big influence on my style in everything that I do. Working on anime changed who I am as a composer in every single way that I can think of. It changed my harmonic language. It changed the way that I think of melody. It changed the way that I look at how you should score a scene. It changed my approach to linear media. It changed my approach to interactive media. Like, any way that, like, I am a musician has been heavily impacted by the experiences I've had on the things I've worked on. And since anime has been such a large part of that, you know, anime has definitely changed me quite a bit as a musician.
And you mentioned that you've got a soundtrack coming out soon, or a game coming out soon. Can you tell me more about that?
It's not coming out soon, or at least I'm not totally sure on that. We're still in development on it. But yeah, Renane, it's actually one of the oldest titles that I've been working on. Because at this point, I've been working on it for, like, I think 5 or 6 years, you know, classic indie game development story.
Yeah.
And it's very jazzy. It's very funky. It's this 8-bit action platformer RPG roguelike thing with very quirky, earthboundy characters and just a fun, jammy, groovy soundtrack with a lot of human voice all over it. And honestly, it's some of the most fun that I've had as a composer, just period. And it's very, very me, for lack of a better word. It's something I'm very personally close to.
Well, and we talked about this a bit more in the panel that we did together, but, you know, jazz is a big part of your background because you ended up studying that in college. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
You know, big shout outs to my parents for not making the obvious determination of saying, why do you want to get a degree in, like, jazz cello? That seems like a bad idea. Spoiler alert, it was a bad idea, but it worked out, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes it just works out.
Yep.
My professional trajectory educationally, I graduated high school very young, just because I skipped some grades when I was a young kid. So I was 16 when I finished high school. And I wanted to go to Berklee up in Boston, Berklee College of Music. And my parents were like, you're 16, don't go across the country quite yet.
Yeah.
Get to 18, you can reassess however you want at that point. So I went to a local university close to where I lived, Stephen F. Austin State University. Big shout-outs to Dr. Stephen Lias and Dr. Evgeny Raichev, two of my biggest mentors by far.
Nice.
Because of those two gentlemen. I went there to study with them. Raichev was my cello teacher. Lias was my composition teacher. And frankly, a lot of what I know today really stems almost more to that time than to Berklee, even, to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I learned a ton at Berklee, and it was just very different things I focused on.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of my fundamentals as a musician came from SFA. And then a lot of the detail work and the networking and, like, the tech side of things and the jazz, for sure, came from Berklee. But I got my classical origin kind of down there. And then when I turned 18, I auditioned and I got accepted to Berklee. I moved up to Boston. And I got a degree in pro music, which was sort of like Berklee's version of a create your own degree. And most people use it as a create your own way to graduate really quickly because you screwed up your degree path. I was not one of those people. I was the nerd who had a copy of the course catalog on my phone and would, like, idly just, like, scroll through the courses, like, finding cool teachers or cool classes that I really wanted to take.
Yeah.
And then I would demo reel my way into those classes, regardless of what the prereqs were, by just going to the department heads and trying to convince them that I wouldn't fail the class if I did it. And that was how I got my video game scoring minor, actually, because you weren't supposed to be able to get that minor without being in one of the tech majors, which I, by definition, was not.
Okay.
A lot of people get confused by this. I was not actually a film scoring major at Berklee. There was no video game scoring major back then, and I wasn't an EPD, electronic production design guy either, or contemporary writing and production, or any major that would have made sense, frankly. My degree focused on cello performance, which I learned a lot of jazz in. It was very jazz-heavy cello performance. It focused on music business. I was one of the inaugural students in the very unfortunately named Berkeley ICE, Berkeley Institute for Creative Entrepreneurship, video game scoring minor, of course, and then just some general production-focused things. I wanted to try and shore up what I thought were my weaknesses. I took songwriting courses, lyric writing, all the things that I thought would hopefully make me a more well-rounded musician, because I felt going into it like, oh yeah, I feel pretty good about like my composition chops. I feel pretty good about myself as a cello player. But let's get like a wider range of cello going. Let's learn this technology stuff that I don't have a background in. Let's learn what a DAW is, you know. Like, a lot of things that are like really basic for the job that I do are things that I learned at Berkeley.
Yeah.
I started comparatively late for the technical side of things.
Oh, you think so, huh? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I did not have a computer until senior year of high school. Like, the first time that I ever wrote music was for my cello audition at Stephen F. Austin in senior year of high school after Christmas. And to be totally honest, the only reason that I wrote something was because I was too lazy to learn a concerto. And I was just like, well, if it's something that I write, it'll be easier to memorize. So I just wrote something that covered my weaknesses, and I auditioned on that. It was not good. It was not a good piece of music.
Does it still exist somewhere?
I hope
Do you
not.
know? Yeah.
You know, I'm sure that somewhere it does.
Yeah.
But if I'm totally honest with you, I spent most of yesterday reproducing a piece of music that I'd written like 5 years ago because I couldn't find the folder for that one. So I really doubt that I've got the files for something from high school.
Yes, very true. Very true.
You know.
Yeah.
Back up your data, folks. It disappears in a flash.
Oh, man. I've had some hard drives stop working, so much so that I was like, what kind of federal crime can I do so that the FBI will restore these for me? Like,
oh, my God.
Because that shit's expensive.
You are one of the real ones, Emily. Thank you so much. If my FBI agent is listening on this call, it's okay. We're good. We're fine.
We're fine. There's nothing happening. I just have a cat. Nothing weird. Nothing weird here.
I have 3 cats. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, what's coming up for you? What are you working on now that you can talk about, you know?
Yeah, so obviously Tencent takes up the vast majority of my time because I work there. We've got a lot of really cool stuff coming down the pipeline, especially on the PUBG mobile side. Obviously, I can't share it right now or say what it is on this podcast, but you heard a little bit of what I was working on right before we started recording this.
I did.
And it'll be a lot of fun, and it's going to have a lot of our mutual friends on the recording.
Sweet.
There's some charity stuff coming down the pipeline. I'm a big fan of doing charity work. A lot of people, some people will know my music from, producing like the official charity vinyl with like Cowboy Bebop and working with Yoko Kanno and the Seatbelts on that. And, I have new stuff that I'm working on with a lot of really amazing musicians. Can't wait to announce that soon. Recently, the Soundfall, my involvement with the indie game Soundfall was announced. I contributed a hip-hop song on that called, Fall Away. Need to remember the name of my own song. That was really cool. Shout outs to Zed Tabani, the rapper on that track, for killing it. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline that's going to be a lot of fun. I've got a couple of anime soundtracks that are coming out this year that I'm involved with, none of which I can announce at this particular moment, but at least 3 or 4 of which will be out before the end of the year, possibly as soon as this season, hint, hint. So, there's a lot of stuff to be really excited about.
Excellent. I am curious, a place like Tencent, for instance, has I'm sure, a budget enough that you can do orchestral recordings. And I know that you do work with live orchestra and stuff like that. Do you ever just say, you know what, we don't need to do that this time. Let's just stay in the box. Or do you just seize the opportunity and you're like, let's go orchestra all day?
It's totally situational.
Okay,
so
that makes sense.
I will almost never say no to live recording.
Sure.
There absolutely are situations where, like, the idea of getting a certain track in front of a full orchestra is just an exhausting amount of labor, and it isn't necessary for what we would be putting them in front of an orchestra for.
Right.
And it wouldn't make sense from, like, a budget perspective. It's like, oh, yeah, this is, like, a minute of music, and the orchestra's in 10 seconds of it. Like, why are we going to, like, spend $20,000 for, like, you know, a minute of, like, you know, nothing? And in those kinds of positions, yeah, I would totally just go to the box.
Sure.
But it depends on the music, you know? Most of the time, unless it's, like, a genre-specific thing where you're trying to do, like, say, a 90s throwback and you want it to sound like it was done on a Rompler, usually we want live music wherever we can because human beings just sound better than programming it.
Yeah.
Just objectively, it's true. And in those situations, with that in mind, it's always a great honor to get to work with talented musicians and amazing recording artists whenever we can. And yeah, Tencent, by and large, does have the budgets where we're able to go after that, where we're able to pursue those opportunities. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the things I love most about working with Tencent. You know, it's not just this idea of I'm going to find amazing musicians, but I can work with artists who I love and, like, I can recommend, oh, I don't just want a flute player or an oboe player. I want Kristen Nigas because I love what she does on everything.
Yeah.
So let's get Kristen on here. Yeah. I love John Robert Motz and what he does. I love David Gibson McLean and what he does. And let's just bring these amazing people, you know, Takahiro Obata on piano. And it's so much fun to bring musicians who you love in and to get to contribute to their livelihood, to get to give them money, give them work, and then to get to share this project with them, share this experience that for the rest of your lives, you always have this thing in common that you did together. And it's just really cool. You know, it's one of the most intimate things that you can do to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. Sharing creativity with other people like that and both kind of putting your all into a track and putting it out into the world and hoping that the fans like it.
Yeah. Well, Mason, I mean, what else do you want to say about what you do or what you've got coming up?
Making a career in music is really hard. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. There is no such thing as making it. There's no finish line. There's just the constant process of continuing to make it. And, you know, the people who are successful in this field are mostly just the ones who are still here like 5 years later. So if you're a composer, if you're a musician, if you're someone who wants to be a part of the video game music world, the anime music world, go out for it. Just start putting yourself out there, start making things, do covers, collaborate in fan communities, and approach developers, you know, offer your musical services. Go out to events like Game Developers Conference, GDC, in San Francisco, or Game SoundCon in Los Angeles, or, you know, Gamescom in Cologne, or Tokyo Game Show in Tokyo, and so on and so forth. And just share your stuff, you know, be a part of the community. That's what I did, and it works. It is probably the most effective way to build up a reputation over time. And that's really what you need if you want to get booked.
It is a wonderful community of people. I do love
Such wonderful people.
Yeah,
my God.
That's good stuff.
So talented, too, you know.
Yeah.
The number of absolute geniuses, even just on the fan community side, just like wildly talented musicians who you're like, why aren't you like super famous? And sometimes they literally are. And you're like, oh, yeah, that checks out.
Yeah.
But, you know, video game music is for everyone. Everyone can enjoy it. Everyone can appreciate it. And everyone could be making it, frankly.
Yeah.
Everyone should have to make video game music as their career. That's the new rule.
It will keep me very busy if that happens.
I know.
That's for sure.
And that's my goal, to be totally honest. This entire interview has been a long-form plug for keep Emily Reese employed. I'll accept my under-the-table payment now. Thank you so much, Emily.
You got it, man. Mason, such a pleasure to get to hang with you last weekend and to get to speak with you again today. Thanks for all you do.
Sure thing. It's an honor. Oh, and one last important note. This podcast is brought to you by Raid Shadow Legends, the only game where... I'm sorry. I had to do it.
I love it. I love it.